organized by NGO Forum on ADB and Accountability Council. I'm Anne Pereles, your moderator for today's session. This session is entitled Approaching the Last Mile Efforts and Amplifying for Strong ADB Safeguards Policy. So there are some photos in the room of the Naho Hydropower Project and the geothermal project in Indonesia, which our panelists will also shed more light into. We encourage you to have a look into these photos, especially like the captions if you haven't seen it. For this session, as many of you would know, the safeguards is one of the cornerstone policies of ADB in ensuring that harm will be mitigated, if not avoided, and adequate protection will be given to project-affected communities. So CSOs and communities have a whole range of issues when we're talking about amplifying our concerns on the safeguards. But for today's session, we'll focus on gender, labor, and the indigenous peoples, as well as its link to ADB's accountability mechanism. So to jumpstart the discussion, may I now refer to E.D. Wong, the U.S. Executive Director at the Board of Directors in the ADB.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yes. Great. Well, good morning to members of the CSO and community and other colleagues. I see some friends from ADB as well and others. It is indeed definitely a great honor to be speaking with you today on this really crucial panel. I'm honored to be here with fellow panelists. I want to start by thanking Anne and the NGO Forum for inviting me to speak on this importance of strengthening ADB's safeguards policy. This is really not only critical to achieving ADB's goal of promoting a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia-Pacific, but it's also really a top priority for the United States, and certainly for me personally. I've been very much engaged, and some of my colleagues from the NGO side, as well as ADB, knows how intensely I've been engaged on this one, particularly. So the ADB really has set this gold standard on environmental and social safeguards in the region. However, we cannot ignore the fact that the current ADB safeguard policy is almost 15 years old. It needs an update to reflect the evolution of development theory and practice. Many of you are practitioners in the field, and we need to learn from you. We have a crucial opportunity for ADB's review of the safeguards policy, or the SPS, to demonstrate strong leadership and building on best practices at other MDBs, multilateral development banks. I know that the African Development Bank just last week passed their safeguards policy, so we're also looking at that, incorporating lessons from our own experience, as well as expanding protections to address climate change and disadvantage of vulnerable groups. Strong implementation, of course, and capacity building and stakeholder engagement are also really critical in this review process. For decades, the United States has been at the forefront of advocating for greater accountability and transparency at these multilateral institutions in which we are a shareholder. At ADB, we're the largest co-shareholders along with Japan here. And we have pushed for stronger environmental and social safeguards to avoid and minimize and certainly mitigate negative impacts from our landing. As we consider updates to the SPS, we must remember that strong safeguards are an integral part of sustainable development. ADB's Independent Evaluation Department, the IED, found that ensuring project design and procurement readiness are critical to operational success, and that due diligence, including safeguards, were a key element in ensuring project readiness. I know we looked at pictures earlier, and I would really be interested in what ADB's process is ensuring that we are looking at the project readiness efforts. These findings remind us that strong safeguards are part of ADB's value addition. As the office of the as the executive director in our office to the ADB, we've engaged extensively, as I mentioned, with ADB management staff, CSOs, on these safeguards policy, right? So, sorry, I missed the. Since it began in 2020, we've provided input on all aspects of the policy review, and we want to highlight some of the key U.S. priorities for the review that align with several of the topics that my fellow panelists will address here today. Our fundamental principle of safeguards is that no one should be harmed by an ADB project. That's really fundamental. To realize this goal, the updated SPS should include explicit protection for disadvantaged or vulnerable groups, including vulnerabilities based on age, disability, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression of sexual characteristics, and other at-risk categories. Environmental safeguards should be improved in line with other NDBs. We also see that the SPS update as an important opportunity to strengthen the bank's approach on climate change and biodiversity. The updated SPS should build on the International Labor Organization's ILO core labor standards, which are already in ADB's safeguards policy strategy, social protection strategy. Given that the increased risk of forced labor in key supply chains, it is critical that this risk is fully addressed. The updated safeguards policy should also continue to include strong intellectual property protections. Throughout the stakeholder consultations along with the CSOs, civil society should be incorporated to ensure that the design and implementation of the updated SPS is informed by project-affected communities and other stakeholders. So we're eagerly waiting for the release of the draft policy. I understand it's going to be in June, waiting with bated breath in the coming weeks. We will continue to engage closely with management and staff on policy and always look forward to input from civil society, particularly including the NGO forum on ADB. Of course, a policy is only as good as the paper it's written on, and the bank will need to ensure that implementation of the SPS through due diligence, adequate resources, and an updated accountability mechanism policy, which we'll also begin to be looking at the bank as well. So we'll keep a very close eye on that process. It is critical that borrowers and ADB continue to undertake robust due diligence as the SPS update is ongoing. This due diligence should be completed prior to project approval and not addressed afterwards as a part of project implementation. Given that the expanded scope of the safeguards, ADB will also need the resources needed to implement the new policy, and we're fully aware of that. We commend ADB, certainly those that are here, but Bruce, for its efforts to expand its safeguards team. These new staff will need to be trained, particularly as the safeguards covers new issues, as I mentioned earlier. Just as important is support and capacity building for borrowers who will need to implement and oversee safeguards implementation on a day-to-day basis. We will also engage extensively on ADB's upcoming, as I mentioned, the upcoming review of its accountability mechanism policy, or the AMP. We believe that accountability and transparency are key to ensuring that ADB projects meet the highest standards and that affected communities have access access to effective remedies when necessary. We look forward to hearing your views as we move forward in this process, and certainly let me extend an open invitation to anybody to be coming to see me, whether in Manila or Zoom, to be fully engaged in this. I want to emphasize the critical role of stakeholder consultation in both the SPS update and implementation of the new standard. CSOs such as those here today are vital to representing the voices of the affected people, and I really commend you for doing that. This is hard work. But I also want to commend Bruce Dunn, who's also on this panel, and his team for the extensive consultation with a wide range of stakeholders. I know many have been going on for a while. While we must not confuse quality with quantity, we've heard that the consultations have been generally well received. These consultations should continue as the draft SPS is released sometime in June, including an extensive period for comment on the draft policy, consideration of relevant comments, and a true meaningful consultation is what we're looking for. We also look forward to CSOs being engaged in safeguards implementation as well. During my time on the board, so many of you know that this is my second time around, but I've also had definitely the privilege of visiting quite a few of our ADB member countries. By the way, I got this in one of those visits in the Micronesia. I really want to also understand the particular challenges of the Pacific Islands in the context of this review. On these occasions, I visited project sites where I've met borrowers who were initially hesitant to adopt ADB safeguards, but will now very proud. I want to call out our colleague from India. This is an example where we met with some of the borrowers. They were very proud of how they've implemented some of the safeguards and acknowledge how safeguards have improved their projects, particularly on gender, by the way. So I have also seen some instances where safeguards weren't properly implemented with harmful consequences. And so that's, again, in the Pacific, I saw that. We're trying to remedy those. These experiences have really reinforced my belief that strong safeguards are essential to the success of ADB projects and the achievement of sustainable development. So the SBS update offers us a chance for ADB to show its leadership as the premier development bank. I truly believe that in Asia and in the Pacific. We continue to be so. Competing with our, not competing, but collaborating as well with our sister agencies across Asia and the Pacific. I am committed to working with ADB management and staff as well as the CSOs to achieve a strengthened SPS that supports the ADB's mission, its stated mission of a prosperous, sustainable, resilient, and inclusive Asia Pacific. So I'm eager to hear from my fellow panelists and those in the audience on their views and concerns where ADB has room to improve and how we can work together to make SPS update a success. So in conclusion, I want to thank you for all this opportunity to speak on this very important and urgent topic. I look forward to our discussion and working together to strengthen ADB safe policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for highlighting that safeguards is definitely a top priority for US and at the board, and no one should be harmed by any ADB project. Our next speaker is Titi Santoro, the Executive Director of AXI, Indonesia. Her main focus of work is on mainstreaming women's rights and gender considerations, and we'll talk more in detail on gender safeguards. Titi will talk about the struggles of women in geothermal projects in Indonesia.
Thank you, Anne. There is a place called Dieng Highland in central Java, Indonesia. It's a beautiful place. The name Dieng literally means the home of the gods and goddesses. The place has a collection of small ancient temples in a remarkable volcanic landscape. The misty location, sulfurous springs, and colored lakes truly make this a place of natural wonder and cultural significance. But the villagers of Dieng staged protest action several times against the expansion of the Dieng geothermal project supported by the ADB. Ms. Yani, one of the protesters, said, "We are worried that the project will suck up the water stocks of the village spring because the power plants are greedy for water. Not only us depends on that spring, but also people from the surrounding villages. We reject the project simply because it is dangerous." The Dieng geothermal projects constructed 31 well pads for drilling and water injection, each of which has 2 until 4 geothermal chimneys. Another reason is the location is very close to the villagers' houses. Some houses only 2 meters from the brand new well, which is supported by the ADB. The villagers were traumatized from the incident when one of the wells exploded in 2016, which caused deaths. Moreover, they see the impacts of geothermal pollution to their potatoes and other vegetable fields and water resources. They see the corrosive impacts on their houses, beside the bad smells like rotten eggs and noise experienced by the communities due to the operation of the existing Dieng 1 plants. Many women face environmental, economic, and social risks from the resettlement and changes in the landscape and livelihoods due to ADB-supported projects operations, including 5 geothermal projects in Indonesia. They face air and soil pollution, noise, water deprivation, and decreased harvest. Among others, it is due to the lack of the application of gender safeguards, particularly regarding gender impact and risk assessment, as required by the SPS 2009. From 5 ADB geothermal projects, 1 doesn't have gender action plans, others have, but there is no further information on the implementation and monitoring reports. Further, the meaningful consultation with women, information disclosure, and gender-responsive grievance mechanism also failed in the project implementation. Lack of guidance in the SPS 2019-2009 operation manual is the main problem for this failure of application of gender provision. Safeguards are defined as measures to protect people from potential harm from project operation. Meanwhile, gender action plan is about participating women in the project, like job and income creation and skills training, but not protection from the potential harm. So the gender action plan cannot replace gender safeguard in the SPS. Both protection, safeguard, and gender action plan, participation are important for affected women, for their communities, and for continuing their lives. ADB must correct the existing flaws in its operation and retain the gender consideration and safeguards provision in the SPS 2009, like gender impact and risk assessment, ensuring women's participation in the consultation, gender-responsive grievance mechanism, and gender-segregated data in the profile of displaced communities. The definition of meaningful consultation of the 2009 SPS is detailed, and it's clear where to apply. Those must be retained and not diluted in the new RDB safeguard policy. So we look forward for seeing how the new safeguard policy is not a dilution, but a strengthened protection of women, their communities, and their livelihood. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dean Rene Ofredeo, President of the Freedom from Death Coalition in the Philippines. And for the next three speakers, can I gently request if you can cut it into a little, 1 minute, a little bit under, so that we can still also have time for Bruce to respond accordingly. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. First of all, we welcome this ongoing efforts of the ADB to update the SPS, and of course, we also commend the team of Bruce for being open to our group to hear our position on environmental, social, and economic safeguards. Now, let me summarize my presentation, raising 5 points. First, I think some of the commitments made by ADB, especially to the SDGs of 2015 and Paris Agreement of 2015, need more concrete translation. In the case of the SDGs, when we had this COVID pandemic, 2020-21, I was trying to examine the terms of agreement in relation to the CARES, this budgetary support for the COVID-stricken countries. And it was not very clear, the relationship. They just announced it is compliant or consistent with SDGs. So, in particular, you see during the pandemic, a lot of people were excluded from the amelioration, social amelioration. But because the government in the Philippines was still using the targeting approach, but in pandemic, you should support everyone. Number two, we agree with the report of this internal evaluation 2020 that the existing handbook of ADB on labor still has no provisions of monitoring and reporting of labor compliance. I hope that they're addressing this. But it's so silent on internationally recognized labor rights, such as hours of work, overtime pay, minimum wage, health and safety. You see, the usual conversation is we talk about core labor standards, freedom of association, collective bargaining, based on the 1998 Declaration of ILO. But there are other international labor standards that need to be observed, especially in ADB projects. And there's a need to institutionalize redress and remediation of labor violation. So, where to go? Number three, in relation to labor compliance and labor standards, I hope we go beyond the mechanical checklist approach. And I have seen this, the way the people look at the compliance. They come with 1 or 2 pages or 3, even 10 pages of this checklist with answerable with boxes of yes and no. If there's a safety standard, yes, etc. But you see, there's a need to go deeper and to have a discussion of the problems, and in particular, in relation to the reality that many ADB projects deal with one contractor or a consortium of contractors, a principal contractor private. And this contractor consortium can have 100 or more suppliers and subcontractors, and they have their own respective work brigades, and usually they are not covered with the agreement between the government and ADB and the principal contractor. And so there should be universal coverage, and there should be universal coverage. So making these suppliers and subcontractors understand that they have to, they are committed to all these labor standards. Number 4, in relation to this, and this was raised yesterday, there's really a need to have a frank and sustained social dialogue. It was mentioned by Ma'am Chantel, before and during any project. And it shouldn't be dialogue after. It should be dialogue before and during, every step of the way. And finally, Ma'am, and Bruce, I hope the ADB will change its language. And I'm referring, the favorite term of the ADB is PPP, public-private partnership, meaning public corporation partnership. I'm wondering, you should treat the community, the people, as partners also in development. So we should have public-poor partnership, public-community partnership, and this will help ADB because if you treat the community and the people and the workers as partners, you can minimize in the projects, minimize moral hazards, avoid abuses, violations by contractors, social conflicts, and there will be a better way of doing things that is acceptable to the society and to the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lito Taka of the Indigenous Women Legal Awareness Group in Mulang in Nepal.
Thank you, and hello everyone, good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Tanu Hyderabad affected community. So I also belong from the Tanu Hyderabad affected indigenous community. So this is the hydropower project funded by the ADB, VIB and the JICA, and it is a 140 megawatt project, and it is 150 kilometers far from the capital city of the Kathmandu. And there was done the environmental impact assessment report in 2009, and according to the EIB report, there were like 838 households who are like directly affected, and 86 households should be relocated from that area. And according to the resettlement people's plan in 2012, so people yesterday 2012 said that there are 785 affected households. And again, the revised resettlement people's plan 2012 said that there are 547 affected households. So there is discrepancy regarding the affected households, and there are like among the affected households, 73% belongs to the indigenous community. And the indigenous community, they have filed a complaint to the complaint mechanism of ADB, and there were like 32 households, and again there are 47 households, new households who have again filed a complaint. So there is the there is not implementation of the safeguard policy in a real meaning, because there is lack of meaningful consultation, because the information was published in only national newspaper, and you can see the picture of the people. They are not much educated, and they don't have access to the national newspaper. They live in a remote area, and they have their own language. So there is not according to the safeguard policy, it should be the meaningful consultation according to their language, the way they understand. And so it is not properly implemented, and there is insufficient environmental and social impact assessment, and there is also lack of fair and adequate compensation, because there is discrepancy regarding the compensation, and there is also intimidation and coercion from the TSO to the affected community, because it was told to them that if you won't take the money from the TSO, then you will lose the land and the money both. So earlier we had so many complaints, like the complainants were more than 100 households. So later on they offered and they took the money from the THL, and so now we have only 32 plus 27. So there is also inadequate grievance mechanism also, because there is no participation in local consultative forum, and there is no information regarding safeguard policy to the affected community, and there is no additional revenue and services through the benefit sharing schemes. And we in this community, we are very close to the nature, and we are the traditional custodian of our ancestral land. So the TSL is taking the land from the community, and the community have we believe in the collective rights. So most of our lands are registered and unregistered. So the TSL is giving the compensation only for the registered land, and according to the safeguard policy, it should become set for the both registered and unregistered land. So now we are in dispute resolution process, and regarding the dispute resolution process, this is also satisfactory because the CSO has, Italy has hired the economic, social, cultural expert and the land surveyor expert, and the report was also during the dissemination time. The report was not consulted with the community, and regarding the hiring the time of the land survey, it was even not consulted with the community, and even for hiring the mediation, like mediator, the committee told that they asked that there should be the person from the indigenous community, but it's not from them. So the dispute resolution process is not in a satisfactory way, and at last I would like to tell that this is the indigenous proof that we do not inherit this earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So I would like to request from the Harbor affected indigenous community that please there should be the implementation of the real safeguard policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ritu. Our last speaker from the CSOs is Radhika Riyan from Accountability Council.
Good morning, and thank you, Anne, for having me here today. I agree with and echo all of the concerns raised by my fellow speakers, and my own comments will be limited to 3 points. Number one, how does a strong accountability mechanism inform and support the new safeguards policy? Number two, what is the current state of ADB's accountability mechanism, and how does it really fare as compared to its peer institutions? And three, what is really needed to ensure that ADB's AM policy review achieves what it urgently needs to, both in terms of the process and also the substantive changes that we need. Now, as we've already heard today, ENS commitments in safeguard policies can be strong on paper, but that means little if it's not implemented well in practice. And a strong accountability infrastructure is an essential element of ensuring proper implementation. Project-affected communities are best placed to know when a project is having unintended environmental and social harms, and it is essential that ADB is hearing from them. Part of that is an effective accountability mechanism policy, and a mechanism that is open, transparent, and accessible to communities. And only then would ADB be able to ensure better implementation and address any grievances that have been raised. Now, where does ADB's accountability mechanism currently stand? We are thrilled that ADB AM policy is finally being reviewed. It is an excellent opportunity to ensure that ADB's policy meets current standards. However, it is important to acknowledge that this review has been long delayed. ADB's AM policy was last reviewed in 2010 to 2012, and since then, other MDBs have not only reviewed their policy once, but twice. This includes the World Bank, EBRD, AFTB, and the UNDP. This naturally means that the policy and practice at their institutions have gone far ahead to what exists at ADB's AM, and we know that the ADB's review needs to result in substantial improvements. Now, as you can see on the screen behind me, the benchmark attempts to highlight some of these key issues where ADB's policy fares far behind. So you can see on the first column, like all of the issues where many other banks have the policy, but ADB doesn't. And this includes important things like community agency, where ADB is the only MDB that still requires communities to not only inform the management, but go to the very people and engage with them in good faith, who they perceive to be responsible for the harm, that is the operational departments, even if they fear reprisals. And of course, this means that ADB's AM will not be hearing the concerns that it needs to. This includes a lack of, they're not allowed non-local or non-national representation unless in exceptional circumstances. And of course, they're not allowed to consult communities on management action plan, which, as you know, forms the very basis on which remedial action is taken, and community inputs are absolutely necessary. So in some very key areas, ADB's policy, AM policy, is pretty behind, and we need to see urgent reforms to this. And it's important to realize that communities don't just come to an IAM to help the ADB get it right the next time, but also to get remedial action this time. And so it's really important that we continue to ensure that this is not just the ceiling, but only the floor of what we expect from the ADB's policy. And number three, so what is it that we need for the ADB to ensure that the policy review is procedurally just and results in substantive changes? Put simply, given our experience from policy reviews of all other NDPs, there isn't a list of steps that will guarantee a good review if the political will to engage in that doesn't exist. And by getting it right, we mean having a process that is transparent, informed by project-affected communities, and concerned with making the policy more community-oriented. ADB can and should use this review to take a hard look at where its attempts to provide remedy and compliance have fallen short, and what it can do to champion project-affected community interests. At the heart of ADB's mission lies not just the responsibility to ensure projects are approved and implemented, but that in the process, it uplifts those it impacts. And to borrow a phrase from Egon, it's a time that ADB sets the gold standard for what the accountability mechanism review is. However, there are standard good practices to review the safeguard and ensure a good outcome. And one of that is that there should be a list of disclosures and consultations done at regular checkpoints. This includes the terms of preference, any internal analysis, the external review report, and all of this needs to be consulted with communities and CSOs to ensure that ADB is on the right track. Two, we wish for the board to set a standard of no regression and also a minimum mandate of changes that it wants to see from the policy to ensure that the outcome of the review doesn't actually lead to a worse situation than what already exists. And finally, while conducting analysis, whether internal or external, it bears repeating that all stakeholders are not equal. Project-affected communities take more risk and experience more negative consequences as a result of bad ENS management than any other group of stakeholders. And so it's not a simple calculus of taking what clients want and what communities want and coming to a solution. I'll end now with a question that I hope Bruce can address in your speech. The AM policy uses concerning language around the review being informed by a cost-benefit analysis. What does that really mean, and how will the cost-benefit analysis factor into the review of the AM policy? Will costs and benefits include the intangible costs of reputational risks and lack of ability to meet its mandate, and or the costs incurred by communities when they face ecological disasters? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. So that concludes the inputs from the CSO. So what have we learned so far? To recap, so we have emphasized that there is lack of guidance in the current safeguards policy operation manual, which is the main problem for the failure of the application of gender provisions in the project itself. So ED also asked how can women participate in the projects being financed by ADB. Dean Rene's input, we should go beyond the aspirational and mechanical checklist mentality that a project is simply an agreement among the ADB government and the contractor. He also emphasized about the labyrinth of the contractors and subcontractors, which is currently not being addressed by the bank right now. Ritu's input, how are collective rights being respected in the safeguards and in the new safeguards policy. And lastly, Radhika also cited significant gaps in terms of how the current ADB's accountability mechanism is lagging as compared to its peers. And on the last point, I think what is also critical in terms of the ongoing safeguards review is that how will the safeguards ensure that there will be no dilution in terms of the parameters of harm, including direct, indirect, cumulative, and induced impacts, because later on this will definitely be a significant component when we're talking about the accountability mechanism. So Bruce, for your response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and good day to everyone. And thank you so much to the NGO Forum for organising this session and for fellow panel members. The points that you've raised today so far have been very important. The case examples from the Philippines, from Nepal, from Indonesia, all very important to us. And as always, we're very committed to actually follow up on these case issues, and very much do welcome these cases to be raised to us. It gives us a greater opportunity to engage with our clients and to work in terms of problem solving and addressing these issues, but also, and importantly for today, looking very much at the lessons learned and what that means for our policy and implementation. So, I do thank you. A lot of important issues that have been, raised so far around critical issues, gender, for example, in terms of strengthening gender action plans, and engagement in the safeguards. which we're very much committed to. Labour and working conditions, which is an area that we're looking to explicitly have a new standard within the policy. Very important, and also developing partnerships. And partnerships are very important with civil society. We see you as important actors in the process. Your engagement with local communities, your knowledge that can really help us with implementation improvements. So partnerships are important, and today, and I think as you'll hear later, we've just signed a new partnership agreement with Building and Woodworkers International to help us strengthen labour and working conditions. So this is very important to us. Stakeholder engagement, again, absolutely critical. And as we have been engaging with local communities and with you through the policy update process, we've been hearing and learning more and more about how important this is to strengthen the policy framework. So this is an area that we're seeking to improve, and I'll touch on that a little bit more. And then, of course, important issues that you've raised, Ritu, from all around indigenous people's engagement, looking at resettlement and compensation within the stakeholder engagement process, grievance redress mechanisms. So it's all fundamental. And then coming to the accountability mechanism review, Roka, thank you very much. This is a very important next step.
그랜드 볼룸에서 개회식이 시작됩니다. The opening session will start at 11 a.m. in Grand Ballroom. 모든 참석자들께서는 10시 30분까지 그랜드 볼룸으로 입장해 주시기 바랍니다. All participants should enter the venue by 10:30. 10시 30분 이후에는 행사장에 입장하실 수 없습니다. After 10:30, the doors will be closed and the entrance will not be allowed.
Okay, so an important announcement for the opening ceremony. I guess a reminder that we need to finish on time as well. These are all very critical issues, and thank you. Coming to the accountability mechanism, I want to say that this is a very important next step, and I agree with you for both the accountability mechanism, but also for the safeguard policy statement, as Ambassador Wong has mentioned. It's been more than a decade, and it's time for us to update. There is a sequencing for the accountability that we do need to align it with the new safeguards, and that's very important. And then in terms of your question, looking at the cost benefit, this was actually included in the policy itself as something that is actually mandated that we need to do. There is a range of factors that need to be looked at, but here we're not looking to trade off the costs and say the costs of accountability are too much, and the benefits of providing people with an effective grievance mechanism. I think for me it's really about looking at the efficiency and effectiveness. How quickly can a modality actually help solve these problems, and how effective is it in dealing with those grievances? And I think that's where cost benefit needs to be targeted, and so happy to work with you more. Now, with the short time that I have, I also want to include a couple of quick points to give you some ideas on some of the directions that we are looking to take moving forward. I'll make 3 quick points. Firstly, our intention is to have better, stronger safeguards. We need to avoid impacts. We need to ensure that we do no harm. We also need to do good through this process. That's something that we're really trying to engage. It's really about people and the environment. But there is not one thing that you need to put your finger on. There are many things that we need to strengthen to do this. One is building capacity with our clients. It's a key priority for us. Another is, of course, enhancing the policy framework, but then strengthening implementation, strengthening monitoring enforcement. And compounding this, we are actually going through the development of a new operating model. A new Office of Safeguards will be established, and my colleague here, Nian Xiaozhang, in the audience, will be the new head of the Safeguard Office. And we're looking to crowd in new staff into this and strengthen their engagement down at the country level. So there's multiple things that we need to do to strengthen the way safeguards are implemented. So that's the first thing. The second, again, on stakeholder engagement, we are looking to include a dedicated standard on stakeholder engagement in the new policy. And this, it's really at the core, engaging with communities, understanding their issues. We need to strengthen the information disclosure. The whole process needs to start early. It needs to be continuous. And it needs to be tailored to the needs of disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. And Ambassador Wong mentioned this. it needs to really look for all people, particularly those that might be disadvantaged due to their age, their ethnicity, their gender. We are looking also at gender orientation, sexual and gender orientation. These aspects are very important. We're also hearing a lot about the importance of a safe space for civil society, and for us, we don't have tolerance for retaliation. That's not something that we want to see, and we're wanting to make that very clear in the new policy framework. So, these are all aspects that I think are incredibly important. And then, just briefly, my last third area is on the policy framework itself. We have been reviewing, actually with your help, we've done more than 130 consultations across many different technical areas. 3,500 people have been involved in the process so far. We are reviewing and updating all of our existing areas, and we're looking to develop a new framework with 10 standards. I won't go through all of those, for time now, but pollution prevention, biodiversity, indigenous peoples, health and safety, all of these areas we're strengthening the land acquisition and settlement process. But we are adding several new standards, labour and working conditions. We're looking also at a new standard on climate change and one on stakeholder engagement, as I've mentioned already. And the new standards, will apply to all ADB financing modalities. So, many areas that we're reforming. Not enough time, of course, to go into all of the details, but I'm sure during the Q&A time, some of you will be very interested in particular areas, and I'm very happy to speak about those later, or on the sidelines of this event and meet with you. So thank you very much, Anne. I hope I've given enough time that we can come to Q&A. Thank you.
So at this point, we'll entertain probably one or two questions from the audience. One or the other. Can you introduce yourself very quickly and then we'll go to the questions.
Thank you. So this question is particularly for Bruce. And Gaia is a global organization monitoring incinerator projects, and we are 1,000 organizations globally, and we are the incinerator. And ADB is funding that. We've monitored at least 5 different incinerators in Asia. That's in Maldives, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, and the Philippines. And all that we've seen, when we say that's international standard to safeguard people, it's not enough. And it's always not consistent. And when we see in Vietnam, for example, it's a private sector operation, and Chinese companies there, and they use Chinese standard. And when in Maldives, there is no even standards on waste. They don't have waste management law that includes incineration and how it manages the ash. But then in ADB didn't do any due diligence and improved that standards first and the national law before implementing waste energy in Lapushi. And there's also another one in Cebu, where there's a strong safeguards nationally that ban incineration and classify waste as not a renewable energy. But we've seen a project there funded by ADB. Same in Indonesia, we don't have any lab, we don't have any safeguards on incinerator toxic ash. But then ADB introduced a project in Solo, in Surakarta, which caused a huge damage to waste picker because they are not also consulted. So with all these different projects, different international standards, that's going to be the best. How will the new safeguards really protect people, and not only at policy level and principle level, but really implemented on the ground and safeguards level? Thank you.
Hello. Firstly, I'd like to thank the panelists. This is a really interesting discussion. My name is Shamir Rashad. I'm from India, and I'm with APYSP as a youth ambassador. I've been taking pictures today. I had a question. We've been working with APYSP and trying to bring young people's voices to this event. In this whole panel, we've talked about so many different things, looking at from gender lens, from the climate lens, but what what does the policy have for us, like the young people? How is the bank or the policy safeguarding, like, young people? Is there anything, could you tell us a little bit more about how is it safeguarding young people?
Okay, thank you very much. I can see there'll be a lot of questions for the Enter ADB, which is why we're here. So thank you very much, Isabel, for your continuous engagement, and from Gaia and others in the Waste Coalition that we're working. So the first thing I want to say, and putting on my hat, I was previously the chief of ADB's Environment Group. We need to promote a longer-term approach to circular economy, and that's something that ADB is committed to. Waste avoidance, recycling systems, and really taking integrated waste management approaches, and working with community. Key areas like the role that waste pickers do in terms of supporting waste recycling, but of course also working with them on their health and safety conditions, because it is an extremely hazardous job. But we're, as part of a wider approach to strengthening waste management and circular economy, different technologies such as waste to energy are being considered. We obviously need robust standards. Now, what is that? And to your question. So, the new safeguard policy, we have been reviewing and updating the standard on pollution prevention. A clear principle is in terms of following international best practice, but also a principle in terms of the more stringent standards being applicable. Now, I think an area that we need to work with and where there's a partnership opportunity is what are the best international standards for incineration? There is differences across, for example, the EU legislation and what we have in other countries across the region and where there are gaps. Now, currently we don't have a specific standard on every individual technology, but that's something that we can work on together. So, yeah, welcome further dialogue on that issue. Thank you. Just maybe there's another announcement.
잠시 안내 말씀드리겠습니다.
There is.
I'll make a brief announcement. 잠시 후 11시부터 그랜드 볼룸에서 개회식이 시작됩니다. The opening session will begin in the Grand Ballroom at 11 a.m. 모든 참석자분들께서는 10시 30분까지 그랜드 볼룸으로 입장해 주시기 바랍니다. All participants are requested to enter the venue by 10:30. 10시 30분 이후에는 행사장에 입장하실 수 없습니다. After that, doors will be closed and no one will be allowed to enter the venue.
All right, I think we've heard that. We're all aware now. So to the question on the Youth Ambassador, so thank you very much for joining on youth. So, yeah, this is absolutely critical, and ADB through our youth engagement program has been trying to establish youth networks and work on this issue. In the context of the safeguards, so coming back to a principle that we're highlighting, we do need to ensure that all groups are engaged in the process of stakeholder engagement, including youth. We need to also ensure that people that might be vulnerable as a result of their age or disadvantage, so children, for example, looking at child protection, or the elderly, all groups across the age spectrum need to be engaged appropriately in that. And I think where the next step where we need to strengthen capacity is helping our clients to then develop more targeted stakeholder engagement plans that actually allows us to do that. And alongside that is also recognising the importance of good practice stakeholder engagement for youth and for others. Why is this important? There's a behavioural shift that we actually need to change here from stakeholder engagement being something that we must do to check the box, to a valuable part of the process that helps you design the project better. And again, I think that's an area of partnership and capacity building, developing skills with our clients, developing guidance on doing it better. So, I think there is a lot of stuff to do, obviously, but I think these are all valuable areas where we have to continue to work together. Thank you.
I think we have one last distinguished very brief.
Yeah, I don't think I'll need a microphone. So this is on financial intermediaries. Just drawing on the recent IFC complaint, which was on the Philippines RCBC Bank, and RCBC was supporting coal through FI lending from IFC. So there was a complaint filed by colleagues here in this room. So after the complaint has been deemed eligible and the investigation has gone through, one of the rulings from the mechanism was that the performance standards have to be now embedded by RCBC on all subcontracting agencies down that chain. I think there is a lesson to be learned here, because we cannot just assume that the parent FI is, inherent, it embeds the ADB SPS, but the passing on of it has to be explicitly written down. So it's more of a comment rather than a question.
Yeah, Ryan, it's a great point. I'm not so familiar yet with the RCBC case, but the principle in terms of cascading the requirements down to sub-loans is very important. That is the principle that we subscribe to. Having the financial intermediaries to have robust environmental and social management systems and then cascading that responsibilities down is a requirement. Now, the practical challenge is then doing that, and monitoring that effectively, so that's something we're aware of. And also the matter of leverage, as you go down that sub-blending, the leverage, the amount of finance, as it gets blended with other co-finance, then starts to get diminished. And so we need to still, though, even in those situations, push for it to be applied. So it's a very important point. Thank you.
At this point, we'll conclude the session. Just an announcement.
I'll make a brief announcement.
I think you can probably continue.
So after this session, there will be another session on labor safeguards by Building and Lubricants International for 20 to 30 minutes. You can 20 minutes. Okay, 20 minutes. If you can stay on, we will encourage you to do so. So again, at this point, we thank everyone for your time, especially our panelists, Wong, Bruce, T.P., Rene, D2, and Danica. We're echoing that we're looking forward for the safeguards and the draft safeguards that will be out, and that will be a continued consultation, and hopefully all of this strong and key inputs on different issues will be reflected into the policy. Thank you so much.